The committee will come to order. Good afternoon. I want to welcome the disabled American veterans here today for our first joint hearing this session, with my first joint hearing as chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. Thank you for allowing this to be my debut, and I look forward to having a solid and good working relationship with the DAV. I hope to continue that. The work that the DAV does is critical to supporting our nation's veterans, and our committees are fortunate to have your help with important work we are doing to improve the lives of our nation's veterans and their families. Before I begin, I'd like to extend a special welcome to those who traveled here from Kansas today. I discovered they are sitting in the very back row in the far corner, and I don't know how their chairman's prerogative didn't someone...
They're obviously Methodists then, they're sitting in the back row.
Maybe they chose that so they could leave early. But before you do that, could you please stand and wave at me so I know that you're here? Thank you to the Kansans who've joined us. Thank you very much. I appreciate my colleagues recognizing the folks from home. Thank you all for being here and for making the journey from across the country. I know that you have left families and loved ones and personal lives to be here today, even with the full knowledge of the shortage of the quality of BPQ here in the nation's capital. That's our Kansans. We won't find the barbecue that we find at home. I'll keep my remarks short. In fact, I asked my staff when they handed me 16 pages to make it about a third of that so that we can jump into the DAV's priorities. I do want you to know, Commander, that I thank you, Commander Whitehead, and your wife, Kim, for being with us today. We're honored by your presence. I also want to commend the work that your leadership team and all the DAV does for our nation's veterans and their families on a day-to-day basis. We've had a lot of legislative changes and progress at the department over the past few years, whether it be through passage of the Mission Act, Blue Water Navy Act, or Appeals Modernization Act, just a few examples. The DAV has been and will continue to be a vital partner to ensure the VA executes these programs and policies correctly. I look forward to your presentation and our discussion today, and I look forward to continuing our work together. I thank you for your service to our nation and your service to others who serve. Chairman Takano, thank you for traveling over here from the House side, and I now recognize you for your opening remarks.
Great, thank you. Well, good afternoon and welcome. I'd like to congratulate Senator Moran on his chairmanship, and I look forward to working together with him this year. Thank you, Commander Whitehead, and the many men and women who have served our nation. Your country owes you a debt of gratitude that we in Congress strive to repay every day. Thank you. I'd also like to welcome and thank everyone from my great state. So are there any Californians in the room today? Thank you for making it all the way from the Golden State.
They're on the front row.
Yes, they are. And they're going to stay through the entire hearing. Among the Californians, I understand that we have Army veteran and National 4th Junior Vice Commander Dan Contreras from Sherman Oaks, California. Dan? Thank you and all the Californians for making your way to this joint hearing. And we still have in California the largest veterans population in the country. I've had the privilege to work with many veteran groups over the years, and I appreciate the dedication and care that disabled American veterans and other veteran service organizations share for our veterans. Without the volunteers mobilized in small towns, the VSOs who take mobile service clinics into remote areas, and our government partners who pitch in to lend a hand where needed, we could not reach all the veterans in need. And that's why we need your advocacy. This year, we have the opportunity to celebrate DAV's 100 years of service to our veterans. In fact, Ranking Member Dr. Rowe and I co-authored a House resolution to honor your work for our veterans and their families. Join me in thanking DAV for their tireless advocacy, and here's the resolution in my hands, so thank you. DAV is integral in the work to connect veterans with resources and helping them navigate the often confusing VA system. But DAV's advocacy also helps Congress to recognize emerging issues and pioneer solutions. As a result of DAV's partnership with Congress, we have better legislation that best serves the needs of our veteran population. As I'm sure everyone in this room can agree, we must work together with all our partners to reduce veteran suicide. It's clear that we have a national public health crisis, and it will take all of us working together to truly address this crisis. And that's why the committee adopted a comprehensive, evidence-based strategy to reduce veteran suicide. We must look at every factor from economic burdens to increased access to care to reduce the crisis. I introduced the Veterans Access Act as one piece of this puzzle to ensure all veterans, regardless of discharge status or enrollment in the VA healthcare system, have access to emergent mental health care. Under this bill, no veteran will have to pay out of pocket for the care they need during a mental health crisis. And while the Veterans Access Act is just one part of the solution, the fight to end veteran suicide must be shared by everyone in our nation. As chairman of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, I have tasked my staff with working with stakeholders, advocates, medical professionals, and VA to find more ways not only to reach our veterans who are in crisis, but also to find ways to expand access to key resources. This work will take all of us, and I encourage everyone to write down the Veterans Crisis Line phone number. That number is 1-800-273-8255. Let me tell you that again. It's 1-800-273-TALK. In other words, 1-800-273-TALK. So just remember, 273-TALK, put an 800 in front of that. If you are a veteran in crisis, please reach out and know there is someone on the other end of the line there to help you. I also want to thank DAV and the VSO community for their diligent and good faith efforts to perfect the Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act of 2019. This bipartisan effort became law in June, and while VA began processing claims in January of this year, the work to ensure VA is completing accurate, fair, and timely rating decisions is not done. A strong working relationship between VA and the VSO community will increase access and visibility of these new benefits. And I hope VA will provide an open and transparent communication with Congress and VSOs about the progress of Blue Water Navy implementation. I continue to be thankful for DAV and the VSO community for their efforts to support veterans. I invite my colleagues to join me in standing in applause for DAV and our nation's veterans. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, DAV. Thank you. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for your opening remarks, and I now would call on the ranking member of the Senate Committee, Senator Tester.
Thank you, Chairman Moran, and good afternoon, everybody. Look, before I get into my prepared remarks, I just want to say the man two down from my left is not Johnny Isaacson. It's Jerry Moran, a senator from Kansas. And I'm going to tell you that Jerry Moran, you guys already know this is a good man, and we look forward to doing a lot of great things in the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee together, and we look forward to looking out for the DAV. And I want to congratulate everybody in this room that's a member of the DAV on your 100th anniversary. Commander Whitehead, it is an honor to have you and your leadership team in front of us today. You are very well served by your legislative service folks here in Washington. You don't need to give me anything for that. It's free. And I can't tell you how much my staff and I really do rely on your advice, the DAV's advice through your staff and their perspective. I want to take a moment to recognize a few Montanans in the room today, and I'm going to ask you folks to stand up. Chase Natalie, where are you at? He's in the overflow room. Well, Kevin Grantier, is he overflowing too? And then Joe Parsetich is the first junior vice commander of the DAV. It's good somebody from Montana finally did some good things in D.C. Thanks, Joe. And I want to thank you all, everybody in this room, for the half of the work that you do for veterans. You do great work in Montana, and you do great work nationwide. And Commander, I've said before, we're here because Congress should take their direction from you. DAV members and their beneficiaries of the VA health care and utilize its programs each and every day. You know better than any of us how the VA is performing nationwide and the improvements that should be made on behalf of veterans and their families. We hold these hearings because only VSOs can help Congress focus on what veterans need and how to make sure VA is equipped to better deliver on those needs. Commander Whitehead, I need to hear from the DAV whether the VA is operating in a transparent manner as they execute the largest overhaul of veterans health care in a generation, and that is the implementation of the VA Mission Act. I need to know your views on the gender disparities at the VA and what Congress can do to push the VA to provide more equitable treatment to our women's veterans. I need to hear from you how toxic exposure impacts your members, from Blue Water Navy claims to Agent Orange presumptive conditions to burn pits. And when it comes to mental health treatment and suicide prevention, I need to know where we as VA is doing a good job and where they need to improve. As you know, a lot was accomplished for veterans in the last Congress, including passage of the VA Mission Act, appeals modernization, the Comrie GI Bill. It is imperative that the VA provide regular opportunities to hear from the DAV and other veterans groups about implementing these laws. VA needs to better understand how the decisions it makes affect the veterans on the ground across this country. And the VA can't gain that understanding unless it listens to folks like you. Commander Whitehead, we are here to listen to you. The voice you and your members provide is an important source of information as we attempt to do right. Welcome again, and thank you for what you and your organization do on behalf of disabled veterans and their families. Thank you.
Senator Tester, thank you. Senator Tester, thank you. I was pleased by your comments in my regard, but I was especially pleased to know that the folks from Montana are in the overflow and not the back row.
Oh, that does it, Moran. The honeymoon is over.
I would say this seriously, knowing that you're not. The veterans deserve better, and we'll make sure the honeymoon continues. Thank you very much, John, for your comments. I now yield to the ranking member of the House, Representative Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Commander Whitehead, DAV members and members of the DAV all auxiliary. It's a pleasure for me to be here today with Chairman Moran. I'll just take a second to say I served with him in the House. I've known him now for a dozen years, and the Senate could not have picked a better chairman. I really appreciate that. And John, appreciate your friendship and working together in the last Congress very closely. We could not have gotten things done if we did. And Chairman Takano, the same shout out to you. And I really appreciate what you've done. It's been an honor and a privilege for me to attend these hearings for the dozen years I've spent in Congress. Because I'm retiring at the end of this year, this will be my last time that I'll be with you all here in this position. It's because of organizations like the DAV that my 12 years in Congress have been so fulfilling, and I know I'm leaving this town in very good hands. Caring for those who've returned home bearing the wounds of war is no easy or simple task, and yet the men and women of DAV, thousands of whom are veterans themselves, work tirelessly to help empower our nation's disabled veterans to succeed. Before I continue with my opening remarks, I'd like to take a moment personally to thank each and every one of you for your service and sacrifice both in uniform and out of uniform. I want you to welcome the DAV's National Leadership Team. It's a privilege and pleasure to have served with all of you here at the nation's capital. I want to extend a special welcome to Commander Stephen Whitehead and his wife, Kim. And I can promise you, Commander, you wouldn't be here if your wife weren't behind you supporting you. I think we all know that well. And, sir, thank you for your over 20 years of service to our nation in the Army, HUA, and for your leadership within DAV and for being here with us today. And I also want to welcome DAV's Auxiliary National Commander, Diane France, and acknowledge the members here from the Auxiliary. And many of you wear many hats, as spouses, as volunteers, as caregivers, and more. Your service to those who've served our country does not go unnoticed, and I thank all of you for what you do. And finally, I want to say a special hello to the DAV members from my home state of Tennessee who are in our audience today. And for those of you from Tennessee, would please stand if you're able, or raise your hand to be recognized. I'd like to take this opportunity to point out there would not be a Texas if it weren't for Tennessee. I do that each year. For 100 years, DAV's been the leading voice for our nation's disabled veterans, 100 years. DAV representatives can be found everywhere, from the halls of Congress to the rehabilitation wing of VA medical centers across our great nation. Wherever they are, the men and women of DAV are committed to lend a helping hand to our nation's ill and injured service members and veterans, and assuring them that they will not face their new normal alone. With DAV's support, there's been a transformation occurring at VA over the last years under the Trump administration. Veterans have greater access to care, greater control over their health care decisions at VA than ever before. That has led veterans to seek out more VA care and express more trust in VA healthcare system and VA services generally. For the first time in history, veterans can use their GI Bill benefits whenever they choose the rest of their life. Veterans' unemployment has reached near record lows. Veterans are getting their appeals for disability compensations decided faster and more efficiently after decades of work. We finally did right by the Blue Water Navy veterans who are finally receiving the benefits that they have earned. VA has more funding and more staff than any other point in history, and has gone from one of the lowest ranking agencies for employee satisfactions to one of the top 6 best places to work in the federal government. That success is due to veteran-first focus of this administration and will continue the advocacy that is done by organizations like DAV. However, there's much work ahead of us, as you know. As you all know, on a personal level, veterans are hardworking, motivated members of society whose contributions to our nation extend well beyond their time in uniform. Supporting them in creating productive, meaningful lives following their service is one of Congress' highest callings. DAV leaders here in Washington continue to provide valuable information and feedback to Congress. That work help us to ensure that veterans are given the necessary tools to achieve their full potential. Looking ahead, we must remain steadfast in our efforts to combat the suicide crisis, as the chairman mentioned, empower veterans to utilize the benefits they've earned to succeed in their civilian lives, realign VA medical centers to better serve for veterans today and for generations to come, oversee the implementation of the expanded Caregiver program, of which you all had a lot to do with, I can tell you, from the number of meetings that we went to with you all, and care for those who've been exposed to toxins in service, and continue our oversight for every aspect of VA to ensure that each and every veteran who walks into a VA office, facility, or clinic receives timely and quality care. I remain hopeful that as our committee continues with the Senate and members of the DAV, we can build on our successes over the past 3 years and continue to serve our nation's veterans and their families well, just as they have served us. I salute you, I thank you, and I yield back.
Congressman Rowe, thank you very much. Congressman Rowe and Chairman Takano, I look forward to developing a good, solid working relationship with you. And Dr. Rowe and I have known each other 12 years. I served for 14 years in the House of Representatives, all 14 years as a member of the Veterans Affairs Committee, and chaired the Healthcare Subcommittee. I would tell you that we may share something now in common, which is the complaints then as a House member were consistently, why does the Senate never act on anything we send to them? And perhaps we can solve that problem as we work together in this new. There is hope. So we will do our part. Let me now recognize one of my former colleagues, Congressman Colin Peterson from the Minnesota's 7th District. He sits on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and he is here, among other reasons, to introduce Commander Whitehead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Takano, ranking members, other members of the Veterans Committee. It's my honor and privilege to introduce a Minnesota native and the National Commander of the Disabled American Veterans, Stephen Butch Whitehead. that we welcome here today. Commander Whitehead hails from Trimount, Minnesota, which is not too far outside my district, and retired in 2019 at the rank of Command Sergeant Major for the 84th Troop Command Brigade in the Minnesota Army National Guard. Commander Whitehead's military service dates back to 1991 when he joined the Army, and he deployed overseas twice and was awarded the Bronze Star in 2007 for combat service in Iraq, and he also received numerous other awards for his service. Commander Whitehead currently serves as the Executive Director of the Disabled American Veterans of Minnesota Foundation. He lives in Rosemont, Minnesota with his spouse, Kim. And this year, Commander Whitehead felt the call to serve once again. He decided to put the uniform back on and now serves as Command Sergeant Major of the Army National Guard's 34th Infantry Division, leading more than 15,000 Minnesota-based soldiers. So Commander Whitehead, thank you for your service, for being here and being part of this, and I'm proud of your work and what you've done for Minnesota and for the country, and look forward to hearing your testimony. And I'd also like, we have, I think, 31 Minnesotans here, and I'd like them to stand up and be recognized. I think they're kind of towards the back. Thank you all for being here and for your service. So I yield back.
Congressman Peterson, thank you very much. Commander Whitehead, the floor is now yours. We look forward to your comments and introductions of your colleagues.
Congressman Peterson, thank you for your kind introduction. Chairman Monroe, Chairman Takano, and members of committees, thank you for providing me the opportunity to present the 2020 legislative program of DAV, Disabled American Veterans, an organization of more than 1 million members, all of whom were injured or became ill during the wartime service. My full written statement thoroughly details the DAV's key legislative priorities for the 116th Congress and reports our many accomplishments. I want to start by recognizing those seated at the table with me, as well as some distinguished guests in attendance. DAV National Adjutant and CEO Mark Burgess, National Executive Directors Barry Jesenowski and Randy Reese, National Service Director Jim Marszalek, National Legislative Director Joy Elam, Chief Communications and Outreach Officer Dan Clare, Auxiliary National Commander Diane France of Florida, Auxiliary National Adjutant Patricia Kemper of Kentucky, DAV Senior Vice Commander Donald Day of New York, Junior Vice Commanders Andy Marshall of Florida, Joseph Percentage of Montana, Nancy Espinosa of Utah, and Dan Contreras of California, National Judge Advocate Mike Dobmeyer of North Dakota, immediate past National Commander Dennis Nixon, my Chief of Staff Greg Remus. I'd also like to recognize the National Voluntary Service Director Jim Kleindes, National Employment Director Jeff Hall, National Communications Director Rob Lewis, and our National Chaplain Michael Dover, who was unable to be with us here today. I'd ask the National Executive Committee to please stand or raise your hand to be recognized. Will the members of the National Legislative Interim Committee also please stand or raise your hand? I would also like to recognize the DAV delegation from my home state of Minnesota. Finally, I want to thank my wife, Kim, who is a vital partner in everything I've done. Mr. Chairman, this year DAV is celebrating its centennial anniversary, marking 100 years of service and support for America's injured and ill veterans and their families. As National Commander, I am proud to continue that tradition. I come from a family that believes in the tradition of military service. Both my grandfathers served, as did my father, an Army veteran who served during the Korean War era. Two of my uncles served in Vietnam, and I have three brothers who also wore the uniform, one in the Army, one in the Navy, and one in the Marine Corps. So it is no surprise when I enlisted in the Minnesota Army National Guard in 1991 and made that my career for 3 decades. In 2006, I was deployed to Iraq. In 2007, my unit came under fire from mortar attacks. We lost a number of soldiers, many others were seriously injured, and I, myself, suffered a traumatic brain injury. When I returned home several months later, I was still dealing with physical, psychological, and emotional injuries, but not knowing quite how to deal with these challenges. I'm ever thankful that my wife, Kim, encouraged me to seek help from the VA. Although I lived an hour and a half from Minneapolis VA Medical Center, I was able to participate in a telecounseling program to address the trauma I had seen and suffered. I soon discovered that my VA providers understood me and the military injuries I suffered better than any healthcare system in the world. And since then, I have chosen to receive all my care from the VA. The VA was there for me when I needed it. Now, we must all work together to make sure the VA is there for future generations. A century ago, President Calvin Coolidge warned that the nation that forgets its defenders will itself be forgotten. We are here today to make sure that never happens. Mr. Chairman, let me begin by extending our appreciation to both committees who helped provide long overdue justice to thousands of men and women who have been forgotten far too long. Thank you for passing the Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act. In addition, we must not forget that there are hundreds of thousands of Vietnam veterans suffering from diseases associated with Agent Orange exposure who are still not getting their full benefits. I have personally seen the ravage of Agent Orange within my family. Both my uncles, who served in Vietnam, passed away from service-connected diseases associated with Agent Orange exposure. Unfortunately, last month, Secretary Wilkie reported to Congress that the VA would further delay making any decision on making 4 pending Agent Orange presumptive conditions until the end of the year. This decision ignores the fact that the National Academy of Medicine has already reviewed dozens of studies on multiple occasions over many years. In every case, it was concluded that these diseases are associated with Agent Orange. We do not need to wait for any more studies. Mr. Chairman, if the VA will not take the right action, then in the name of justice, you must. Our Vietnam veterans have waited long enough. We also need Congress to pass legislation that can help newer generations of veterans who are suffering or will suffer due to toxic exposure from burn pits. It is worth noting DAV's early role in identifying the potential dangers of burn pits. In 2008, Dan Clare, the same veteran at the table with us today, was deployed to Balad Air Base, Iraq, and alerted DAV to an internal DoD memo detailing the possibility for chronic health hazards associated with the smoke. DAV helped pave the way for the Airborne Hazards and Open Burn Pit Registry and has spent more than a decade advocating for affected veterans. When I was based at Camp Scandia in Iraq, I myself took a number of trips to our burn pit, where everything from tires and batteries to medical and human waste was burned. Upon my return home, I had new respiratory, cardiovascular, and thyroid issues, and have a number of fellow soldiers who serve with me as well. For the past year, we have worked with Senator Sullivan and Manchin to develop the Veterans Burn Pits Exposure Recognition Act that could help these veterans now. The legislation would formally concede that veterans who served near burn pits were exposed to harmful chemicals and toxins, thereby making it easier to prove direct service connection. We ask all of you to support this legislation, S2950, so that veterans suffering from burn pit exposures do not have to wait decades for justice like the Vietnam generation before them. Mr. Chairman, one of the most important promises made to our nation's veterans is providing timely, high-quality health care. Last week, DAV and our independent budget partners, VFW and PVA, issued an interim progress report on implementation of the VA Mission Act. Only 8 months have passed since the law took effect, so it's still too early to judge whether it will be successful. But as of today, of the 26 recommendations that we made to guide implementation of the law, only 1 has been fulfilled. 11 have not been fulfilled, and it's too soon to judge the remaining 14. Perhaps our biggest disappointment is the VA's failure to meet the Mission Act October 1st, 2019 deadline to expand the Caregiver program to World War II, Korean and Vietnam era veterans. Despite 16 months to prepare, the VA failed to implement the required IT solution and delayed the expansion until later this summer at the earliest. This is simply unacceptable. We call on Congress to take whatever actions are necessary to mandate that the VA end the delay and begin caregivers expansion immediately. In addition, we call on Congress and the VA to open the program to caregivers of veterans whose disabilities were caused by illnesses. In fact, our past National Commander, Dave Riley, a former Coast Guard rescue swimmer here with us today, lost all 4 limbs to waterborne bacteria that nearly cost him his life. But his wife, Yvonne, is still not eligible for caregivers program. It's time to end their wait as well. Mr. Chairman, we want to thank all of you for another big victory last year, the passage of legislation to finally phase out the SBP DIC offset that adversely affects so many surviving spouses of disabled veterans. This was a great step forward, but now we call on you to continuing to honoring and supporting the families of survivors of disabled veterans by passing legislation to increase DIC rates and expand eligibility rules for surviving spouses. To keep our promise to the women veterans, we call on Congress to enact the Deborah Sampson Act. This comprehensive legislation ensures women have access to high-quality, gender-sensitive, and specialized health care services to the same extent as their male peers. All veterans, no matter their gender, race, or sexual orientation, should have equitable access to all of the benefits and services and should feel welcome and safe when accessing the care they earned. And yet, VA research showed that 1 in 4 women, veterans reported inappropriate, unwanted comments or behavior by male veterans on VA grounds. The VA made a commitment to create a more inclusive culture through the Stand Up to End Harassment campaign. We fully expect VA leadership to foster that culture from top down. Respect must begin with each and every one of us. Mr. Chairman, while much of our focus in Washington is on advocacy, DAV's core mission around the country involves providing direct assistance to veterans, most prominently through our National Service Program. Across the country, there are almost 4,000 DAV National, Department, Chapter, Transition, and County Veteran Service Officers offering free claims assistance. We represent over 1 million veteran family members and survivors, and we provide representation for nearly 215,000 pending claims for benefits. We also assist separating service members through our Transition Service Program, which provides benefits counseling and assistance at nearly 100 military installations across the country. When disaster strikes, DAV is there to help impacted veterans. In 2019, we provided $300,000 in emergency cash support to 500 veterans affected by hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and fires in Alabama, California, Florida, Nebraska, North Carolina, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, and Texas. We also help veterans find jobs through our National Employment Program. Since 2014, we have hosted over 600 traditional and virtual career fairs with over 200,000 active duty, Guard and Reserve members, veterans, and their spouses attending. In total, this effort has resulted in more than 140,000 job offers. The DAV Volunteer Service Program helps ensure that ill and injured veterans are able to attend their medical appointments. In 2019, our volunteer drivers logged over 20 million miles and provided more than 615,000 rides, taking veterans to VA healthcare facilities, saving taxpayers more than $31 million. Finally, We're very proud to co-present, along with VA, the National Disabled Veterans Tea Tournament and the National Disabled Veterans Winter Sports Clinic, often referred to as Miracles on the Mountainside. Mr. Chairman, President Teddy Roosevelt once said, "Far and away, the best prize that life has to offer is a chance to work hard at work worth doing." Well, to me, that prize is being part of the long and storied tradition of DAV, one that I know will continue to flourish for the next 100 years. Thank you for the opportunity to present DAV's 2020 legislative priorities and highlight the many services we provide to America's injured and ill veterans. May God continue to bless the DAV, the men and women who serve our great nation, and the United States of America.
Commander, thank you for your heartfelt and commanding testimony. It is compelling. Let me ask a couple questions. We're going to have a round of just 3-minute questions among the members. Tell me this about, you caught my attention on the Mission Act implementation and the recommendations that had been made to the VA. I think it was 11, 14, and 1, not a perfect record by a long shot. What is there a response from the VA in regard to the failure to implement your recommendations? What are they telling you?
Chairman, that's a great question, and we're getting a wide range of answers on that, but I'd like to have my staff maybe elaborate a little bit more on that.
That'd be fine.
Yep.
Well, we know that the Mission Act is absolutely critical to the modernization of the healthcare system and moving forward, and we certainly want to see that faithful implementation and full implementation of all of those great provisions that are in there. Dr. Stone's been very forthcoming with us and engaging with us, but we would like more access to the program offices who are dealing with, some of the minutia related to these provisions. We feel all of us here, use the VA healthcare system. We feel as an organization, our members can provide excellent feedback that we can share with VA as they're developing the various parts of the network, the community care network, sharing with them the problems that they're having or not, the good and the bad. We've gotten great feedback on some of the urgent care benefit, but problems, in between. So we think having a good collaborative relationship is essential. We don't want to just be briefed on something. We like and then it's in a complete phase at that point. We'd really like the opportunity to have more meaningful engagement.
Ms. Him, you and I share that same goal of having input when it still matters.
Right.
And I also hope that we have the opportunity to see that once it is implemented, the implementation is determined, that it's understood out in the countryside. So many times what I hear in Washington, D.C. is satisfactory to me, but when I'm in Kansas, they've never heard the same thing I've heard. And so I look forward to working with DAV to make sure that Mission Act is implemented correctly and that there's knowledge for the providers across the country. Let me talk about Blue Water Navy and its implementation. Is the VA facilitating, Commander, the input from the VSOs? Are you getting enough attention in how this act is being implemented?
Chairman, that was a great thing to bring up because before they rolled it out, we were asking a lot of questions like, hey, where were we at with it, or where are we at, and we were getting some feedback, but not at the level that would really help us to be able to go back to our members and provide some good knowledge to our members that are going to be applying for those benefits, like where are we at, how long does it take to get this going? But to the more details, if my staff could please add a little bit more to that, I would greatly appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Right now, they've told us, well, we know that there's 18,543 claims pending, and that's according to the Monday Morning Workload report from VBA. And they've told us informally they've processed about 1,000 Blue Water Navy claims already to the tune of about $20 million in benefits. They haven't given us any facts, any grant rates, denial rates, and we've asked for those figures and stats to tell us what's going on with that information. We want to know exactly what's happening out there. So we certainly think the collaboration could be a little bit better. The information sharing could be a lot better. We're doing as much as we can to outreach to Vietnam-era veterans to ensure they are out there filing claims if they believe they're entitled to benefits. And we've done that through social media, We have an information seminar program where our NSOs are out providing information in the communities, and we're spreading that word as much as possible. We want as many people who believe they're eligible to come in and file a claim for those potential benefits.
Thank you very much. It's always amazing to me the number of veterans who do not know what they are entitled to or what the program involves. And if we're going to be successful in solving that problem, it's going to take the full effort of the DAV and others. And so you need the information yourselves. So we look forward to working with you to accomplish that. I'm going to do my best to hold members to the 3-minute time rule. I'm already over a little bit myself, so I'll forego something later. But Chairman Takano is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commander Whitehead, we know that families are so important to veterans, especially severely injured veterans, as they go through their healing process. Can you detail just how impactful family caregiver support is for these veterans?
Absolutely. As I said in my remarks, my wife, my caregiver, was instrumental in me getting the help I needed. Our spouses know us better than we know ourselves sometimes. When our veterans get back and they get back to society, we have this strong front on us, right? We're invincible, right? We can handle anything. We just got back, we're good. But there's caregivers that are there to really help us make sure we're getting all the help we need to be able to be stronger and better in life. But in particular to your question, if my staff could maybe elaborate a little bit more on that, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. When we talk about caregivers, it's important for us to remember that caregivers frequently put their lives on hold. They give up their educations, they give up their careers, they don't have health care, they give up their future retirement security and 401ks, and their Social Security is diminished because of the working quarters, which they do not have. Having said all that, research has shown that mental and physical health outcomes of catastrophically injured veterans is better when delivered by caregivers at home. And in addition, while the nation's taxpayers save billions of dollars of otherwise institutionalized care and expenses, needless to say, we applaud Congress when this benefit was passed. But this last year, it was a shocking revelation. At the 11th minute, on the 11th hour, basically, to say, we know everybody is ready to line up, fill out applications, and start expanding the caregiver program, only to be fooled by the idea that they would be prepared. And then instead of saying enroll in the current and ongoing caregiver program, no, we know that you've suffered for 5 generations. We know that you need the care and services and supports, and we can deliver them, but let's wait for an IT initiative that'll take until the summer of 2020. I can only share with you the great disappointment of not only myself, the staff here in Washington, but the membership of 1 million members nationwide.
Thank you. I want to get to my next question. As you mentioned in your testimony, VA has not included bladder cancer, hyperthyroidism, Parkinsonism, or hypertension to the list of presumptive conditions associated with exposure to Agent Orange. Can you explain, Commander, why VA's failure to add these conditions to the presumptive list, despite the positive findings of the National Academies of Medicine, is different than past practice?
We don't know why. The research is there, the facts are there. We believe they should roll it out. They should be implemented right away, immediately, so these veterans that have been suffering far too long receive the care that they should as well. But, I'll let my staff to maybe elaborate a little more detail on what the VA has shared directly with them.
Sorry, in regards to Blue Water, even though the law was passed, again, the shock and outrage that occurred, first because the court passed the decision a year ago and actually said there was entitlement under Procopio v. Wilkie. Then there was a delay, and then there was an extended delay before they make a decision as to whether they had appealed the decision to the court, the Supreme Court. And then Congress passed the law, and then in that law, 6-month delay further yet. So an entire year in order to line up veterans. And this is unique in the setting that normally within the VA, for specialty cases, those who are impoverished, those who are in severe financial hardships or have actual hospice needs and are there on their deathbed, these benefits was not extended. There was a blanket stay. And as you all know, policies rarely benefit from a blanket anything. But to actually make veterans wait another 6 months just to begin the adjudication process When they can stage ratings, they could have rated those cases all along and made them effective on January 1st. So now here we are a year later, we kick the ball down the road, they kick off the program with an expectation that was put out there of 400,000 veterans are going to raid the system, and it's going to cost billions of dollars, and we've got less than 20,000 veterans at the door. Shocking, and absolutely unfortunate for our nation's Vietnam veterans, and for those who served off the coast who were entitled to these benefits before, and a VA error is what interrupted those benefits. The Department of Veterans Affairs should be held accountable, and Blue Water Navy, and trust me, we will have oversight of Blue Water Navy statistics and make sure this process is working as it should, or we'll be back before you to tell you why.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I yield back.
Congressman Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go very quickly and just give you a summary of my 12 years. When I first got here, VA benefits, cemetery and health care, $97.5 billion. The president's ask in this budget, which we're going to go over this Thursday in detail, is $243 billion, almost a $250 billion increase. And when I got here, there were 250,000 employees in the VA system. The ask this year is north of 400,000. We had breakfast, Chairman Takano and I did just the other day. The other interesting thing that I felt was very good was that 47% of eligible male veterans seek VA care. Now 41% of women veterans, as Commander, you said. And by the way, do you have to be a sergeant major because your governor's a sergeant major? We know Tim Walz very well. Appreciated his service. And you, and I know when I was in the infantry myself, it was God, Commanding General, Command Sergeant Major, not necessarily in that order, as who was in control. I still remember that as a young officer. I look back and we've kicked the VA around a little bit, but we put a lot on their plate in the last 3 years. We really did. We put the Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Bill, and Congressman Boss right here. I think one of the best things that's happened are the appeals modernization. When I got here, there were 1 million backlog claims. That was unbelievable to me in 2009. And I saw Dr. Lawrence the other day. They hope to work that down to 0 by July the 4th of this year, those claims. I think that's a remarkable turnaround. So the VA's done some good things, and we passed the Forever GI Bill, the Mission Act. And by the way, for you all, when I leave here, I'm going to work on the Caregiver program with the Dole Foundation. I plan to do that. Blue Water Navy bill, I mean, 10 years we worked on that to get it done, and you're absolutely right to be impatient, but it's getting done. And I want Commander Whitehead, I know I want to mention this, and was just mentioned by Mr. Reese, the VA started processing those claims, and what are you hearing from your membership about them getting adjudicated?
That our members are actually, the process is improving. You know, our members are getting the stuff a little faster. But again, it's the back and forth that we're really dealing with. You know, the inaccuracy, you know, from different VA places and stuff like that. That's a frustration piece for us. But if my staff can maybe elaborate a little bit more on the adjudication piece.
Yes. So we know, you know, currently we were talking about the backlog. There's 71,000 claims in the backlog right now, and the backlog is any claim that's pending over 125 days. Right now, for the Blue Water Navy claims, there are 0 claims that have been pending over 125 days, obviously. So we're paying very, very close attention to that fact. How long is it taking? But our membership has been fairly happy so far with the decisions that we have seen. We just haven't seen enough of them so far.
Good, thank you. And I want to yield back, but I'll put this for the record. The VA expects to begin the expansion of the Family Caregiver Program pre-9/11 veterans and their caregivers later this year. And you may answer this later. What recommendations do you have for VA and our committee members as that expansion begins to make sure we get it right? And I'll leave that off because my time's expired.
Ranking Member Rowe, thank you very much. Senator Tester.
Thank you, Chairman Moran. Once again, it's good to have you, Commander Whitehead. Do you know off the top of your head how many Vietnam veterans are members of the DAV?
Off the top of my head, no, but I'm sure it's the highest percentage that we have in our membership right now is Vietnam veterans.
If you're a Vietnam vet, could you raise your hand? If you're a Vietnam vet under the age of 60, raise your hand. Let the record show that there are no hands left up, okay? So the question here is what is Blue Water Navy and Agent Orange presumptive benefits, and caregivers all have in common? I'll answer it if you don't.
They've all waited too long to get the benefits they've earned.
Yeah, that's right. We still got damn few World War II folks and a few Korean veterans. Most of these folks are Vietnam veterans. And we're talking about Blue Water Navy, and we're talking about the 18,000 claims that have been in, and 1,000 of them have been taken care of. Randy, you talked about that. I mean, we're behind the 8 ball already. We're talking about presumptive conditions with Agent Orange. And before Shulkin was ready to leave, which has been a couple of years ago, maybe longer now, he was ready to declare the 3 because the science is there through the National Academy of Sciences. We're still waiting for it. Now we passed Caregivers in the Mission Act, and we don't have an IT system that'll support it. So we've got folks out there. And by the way, this won't cost taxpayers. This will save taxpayers money. So anything you can do, that's right, you can give applause for that. I'll take that. And by the way, not only does it save money, it improves quality of life, because wouldn't you rather be at home than in a healthcare facility? So it's all really important. And so you guys need to continue to rattle some chains around here. The truth is that I don't think it's all Wilkie. I think it comes from an outfit called the Office of Management Budget, and this has been said before, but they're trying to outlive you, and by God, they're doing it. And get aggressive. That's all I'm going to tell you, and I'll help you any way I can in your aggressiveness. Really quickly, you got 35 seconds to answer this, and it's a really easy question. Talk about mental health resources within the VA. Tell me what grade you'd give them if you were a teacher, and tell me if you were the head of the VA, what's the first thing you'd do to improve it?
Well, the quick answer is I've used it. I'm using it, right? And I've truly appreciated all the help I've gotten. It's actually allowed me to be who I am today, to know what my weaknesses are and how I need to identify my strengths. So the VA is doing a great job when it comes to me. But the struggle we have is the VA is not getting out there. Those that are actually not using the VA system are the ones that are suffering suicide right now. Those are the biggest percentages that we're losing, is those that are not using the VA system. So we got to find those veterans and get them enrolled into the VA, because the VA is getting after the suicide. But as I was mentioned earlier, it's going to take every one of us in this room and in society to get after suicide, and I believe the VA is doing it right.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you.
Congressman Bill Arakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and congratulations on your chairmanship. And I enjoyed working with you over the years, and also you work with my dad as well, Congressman Mike Bilirakis. And I'd like to recognize the Florida delegation. Please, if you could stand or raise your hand. We've got to have a couple here. All right, very good. Is Frank Chicolo here? Is Frank here? Andy Marshall's here. Yeah, they're. All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And Chairman Takano, we're catching up with you. I have one question. Commander Whitehead, you talk at length in your testimony about the importance of caring for veterans who have been exposed to potential toxic substances and open burn pits while stationed overseas. DAV's primary solution is to remove the concession of exposure requirement for veterans who must prove their individual exposure to those toxins. Can you elaborate on why you believe this approach moves the needle forward? And then I have a follow-up question as well.
As I stated in a great question, and as I stated in my statement, you know, I stood over there and I smelled it, right? The wind come in and you could smell the burn pits throughout the whole base. So I truly believe everybody that was on the base is affected by the burn pits. Now, how it's going to affect each and every individual, I don't have that answer, but you know what? The doctors that are out there that are treating our veterans, they can figure out what is causing these illnesses, and that's why I believe by identifying and lifting that restriction, we allow that veteran, if they do come up with some illnesses, they can get the help and maybe get the service connection that they deserve for that illness because of what they were exposed to. But if my staff can maybe elaborate a little bit more on that.
Okay.
Absolutely. The concession of exposure, for the most part, is for direct service connection. And for service connection, you've got to have a disability, had to have onset during service, and there has to be a medical nexus that attaches between the two. And since veterans don't know exactly what they were exposed to concede what they were exposed to gives them the ability to go and talk to their clinician, talk about the chronic disabilities they have, and to get a medical opinion that would either link the two or separate the two. And that would give the golden nugget in order to be able to file for direct service connection before medical research and science has time to catch up. Over time, these disabilities may become presumptives, but that's too early now. We need to get them direct service connection for those who have those chronic ailments today, have clinicians who are taking care of them, and just give them the information. And that's really what this is about. It's conceding that X, Y, and Z were in burn pits, and if you're exposed to X, Y, and Z and have this chronic condition, yes, we feel it's related, you get service connection, or no, we don't, and you don't.
Very good.
It's about
Thank you.
equity.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I guess my time has expired, and I'll submit the questions for the record. Thank you, and God bless you, and thank you for your service to our country.
Representative Allred.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to congratulate DAV on a century of service to those who have served us, and thank you for your service as well. Dr. Rowe was mentioning that Texas would not exist without Tennessee, and I just want to remind him that a great Texan said, "Y'all can go to hell, I'm going to Texas."
That was actually a great Tennessean that said that. Davy Crockett.
I hope you wouldn't know that. So to all the Texans who are here, if y'all could stand up or wave a hand, thank you so much for your service. Thank you for being here. I'm glad that we are talking about toxic exposures because recently, with some of my colleagues here on the panel, we visited Kuwait and Afghanistan over Thanksgiving to spend some time with our folks who are deployed over there. And I noticed in Afghanistan the extreme poor air quality that they are dealing with, particularly if you're stationed in Kabul. As you probably know, it's surrounded by mountains. The air quality there is similar to a burn pit because in the surrounding areas, they are burning everything they can for warmth, for light. And if you track the air quality, which on my phone I look almost every day what the air quality is there, it's in the extremely toxic range. And so I'm wondering if we are doing enough to expand the understanding of what toxic exposure is to include air quality while you're deployed.
You know, that's a great question for the fact of, there's research being done today, and continuing has been, and research is important to everything we do because we want to make sure we identify everything, air quality, and it's being tested every day. But, to identify each everything, we need that research to prove that. But I know, as we said earlier, we had somebody that was over there and has seen some of this, so I'd like to have my staff maybe elaborate on this if we could.
It really comes from a two-pronged approach. DOD does have a periodic occupational environmental monitoring survey they do, which is like an OSHA survey, and it does include air. But normally this is under circumstances less than combat. So combat operations and kinetic tempos, that doesn't allow for those. Obviously, it's very difficult to do. But in these larger bases, just as an example, in the most recent news of K2, which was a military base that had some toxic exposures, it's actually their documentation that actually shows the contaminants of depleted uranium and asbestos that was in the soil and the risk of those pollutants being picked up in the air due to all of the storms that they have in the area. These are tools that are in use today. How efficient they are at doing that and how diligent they are, again, I think when you're the war fighter, you have to make a choice of tactical operations and strategic operations, but there's always room for improvement.
Well, thank you. I think while we were there, General Miller told us that this is something he thinks that everyone who's been deployed there is going to have to deal with, and I think we're going to have to keep our eye on that here. So thank you all for what you're doing. You've certainly done a great job in Texas, and I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you. Congressman Bost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I want to reach out and have all the Illinois veterans in the crowd, if you could raise a hand, stand up and wave. And I wanted to say thank you for being here. And I also want to mention someone that's here, the director of the VA of Illinois, a former colleague of mine, Linda Chapalavia, is in the back there. And Director, thank you for being here. It's great to have everybody with us, and thank you all for your service. My first question, Commander, was dealing with toxins as well, but I think they've talked about that quite a bit, so I'm going to go on to another question. The Veterans Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act was a massive overhaul of how the department processes appeals. As with any initiative, regardless of the success of being implemented, further improvements can likely be made. Do you have any recommendations on how we can improve from what you've seen already of the implementation?
You know, thank you for that question. Actually, with that direction, I would like my staff maybe address that right away.
Thank you. Great question. I think the collaboration that created AMA was one of the single best things that ever occurred, right? Everybody working together, and that's what we haven't seen happen since then, right? We would love to see that in every project that VBA does, or in VHA for that matter. Overall, we're very happy thus far with what's going on with AMA. We are a little concerned about the hearing backlog at the board. We're paying very, very close attention to that. We know they're ramping that process up and trying to do as many hearings as possible throughout the year and do hearings at different locations, things like that. VA medical centers opening that up. So we're paying very close attention to that piece of it. But overall, we're very happy. And I think the information sharing piece that we get from the Appeals Management Office with Dave McClinican and then Cheryl Mason at the board has been tremendous. They've been, you know, anytime I ask them for information, they give it to us right away. And that collaboration still exists through that process.
Thank you. And Commander, that was what I was looking for, was some kind of answer as far as that side. Now let's look at the other side. What about suggestions you can have for when the initial claims process starts? What can we do to speed that process up? Because I'm telling you, I was a veteran and I can tell you this story right quick, and then I want you to answer the question. And I've told this to Chairman or Ranking Member Rowe and others. I had a hearing loss in the Marine Corps. And because I was so young when I left, they said, if you sign this waiver that you won't come back on us, you know, well, and then I was a state legislator. And somebody said, what, a VSO came to me and says, you know, you can apply for that. I applied 3 times, became so frustrated with the process, I quit. I became a member of Congress and then a person with the VA. I told that story and they said, well, we can get that for you. And my answer was, to hell you can. I'm just wanting to let you know that I know exactly what people have to go through and what do we need to do to improve it, and that's what I'm asking you now.
Well, I think it starts early on in the career, right? As that soldier's transitioning out of that service and now becoming a veteran, that's critical. We got to get this information in front of that soldier and make sure that now veteran understands the process. So our TSO program, the transitional service officers that we have on our bases, are critical to make sure we're getting out and letting that soldier know, now veteran, where's your medical records? We got to prove everything. When that veteran left that service, it was a checklist. I can tell you, I've gone through it just as you have, you know what? And you want to get off that base, get out of that uniform as fast as you can. But guess what? What that DOD is not telling that service member, now a veteran, is what you went through, you're probably going to have some, you know, maybe have some problems later. But now that's somebody else's problem. DOD's problem is no longer there. Now it's a VA's problem. And now that person has to go back how many years to jump through hoops? Because how many people kept their medical records, you know, especially Vietnam veterans. When they left and got out of Vietnam, came home, they didn't have medical records. So now we got to prove it. So that piece, that connection between DOD and VA, sharing those records, making sure that the service member, now veteran, knows how to enter and get in that system.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Marzalek, thank you for your work and being a native of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I won't ask all the Pittsburghers to stand or anything because we have one at the front table, so we're proud of you, appreciate what you're doing. I was wondering quickly if you could repeat the statistics that you're trying to get from the VA on the Blue Water claims, how they're being processed, because we can write that down and try to get the same information as well. If you wouldn't mind just going through that again quickly.
Absolutely. I mean, we asked how many claims they processed. They said about 1,000. Well, exactly how many, and how much in benefits did veterans how much were they awarded thus far? They said around 20 million. We want the facts. I mean, if we're partners in this and we're trying to help get people in the door and filing claims properly, we want to know what's going on. So any information they can give us, it should be factual.
Including whether any have been denied.
Right. How many have been denied? How many have been granted? What's the grant rate? What's the denial rate on the cases?
Grant and denial rate.
Yes.
Total numbers. Got it. Because one of the issues we've been following for a while are also job vacancies at VBA and the working conditions of the raters and reviewers themselves, who were having a hard enough time throughout 2019, keeping pace with what was happening and adding these new claims in. That problem's not going to get better. It's likely going to get worse if VA doesn't address the personnel side of it. So thank you for that. Commander Whitehead, we have also been concerned about the issue of VA not including bladder cancer, hypothyroidism, Parkinsonism, and hypertension to the presumptive list. Can you just say a word about what life is like for your members that are suffering from these 4 extremely serious diseases, especially when they are also ineligible for caregiver benefits due to the technical problems that VA has had? And I want to be clear for those in the room, it's not as if these problems are not the result of VA starving for resources. We upped VA's budget yet again last year. The administration has again come requesting another 12 or 14%. This is a problem of execution. So if you could just enlighten us a little bit more what these problems of execution really mean in the lives of your members.
Well, the biggest problem we have there is the veterans continue to suffer without getting the care, right? Some of these maybe are service connected for something else, they're able to get the care, but they're having to pay for that care for the stuff that's not service connected. So it's a financial burden right away, first thing, but then also—
Exactly. You don't have the option to not be treated for Parkinsonism
Yeah.
or bladder cancer in particular.
Yeah. So the big thing with the caregivers piece is what happens when that veteran passes, and now that veteran passes from one of those is not service connected or presumptive. That caregiver gets nothing. That caregiver has nothing to fall back on. And as we said earlier in our statement, they give up so much to be that caregiver. They haven't had a job for a while, their retirement and all that, so now they don't have that.
Have you gotten a better explanation than we have as to why these 4 conditions were denied? Because it does seem that the evidence and the science are there, and that we have not really gotten a straight answer as to why that is.
If my staff can maybe take that.
Well, I think there was a recent press release as well as information that came to light in one of the news articles that pointed out that the Office of Management and Budget made a decision that it was just not cost effective, and they asserted that it was medical science wasn't there when there have been literally dozens of scientific reviews, medical experts from the institutes of medicine that have associated these conditions. The simple fact that statistically there may be others in the population that have these diseases doesn't mean that they were caused by military service when this association does. They just don't want to do the right thing because it costs too much.
Well, I thank you for continuing your advocacy on that. And again, it is just shockingly inconsistent and inhumane in a year when they're coming for a 15% budget increase anyway to pinch pennies on the people with these conditions. So thank you for continuing to fight for them, and we will as well. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Commander Whitehead, thanks. Congratulations on 100 years. And congratulations personally on your military service, which you're continuing, which I think is great. Appreciate the meeting yesterday with your team. Honored by the DAV's award, so thank you on that. You know, Dr. Rowe mentioned Texas and Tennessee. Sorry, Congressman Allard has already left. You know, in my state, the great state of Alaska, I thought I'd pile on a little bit with regard to Texas. We have a saying that if you split Alaska in two, Texas would be the 3rd largest state in the country. So. Just saying, you can pass it on to the congressman. Sorry for the Texans here, but any Alaskans here? I know Pam, thank you very much. We have more vets per capita in any state in the country, so we're very proud about that. Commander, I want to thank you for the shout out on S2950, the Veterans Burn Pit Exposure Recognition Act. I want to ask all of my colleagues to, we have a good start, a bipartisan start on that. You know, what we're trying to do here, you mentioned Agent Orange, the Blue Water Navy, a lot of us were co-sponsors of that, but as we talked about in my office yesterday, that's all reactive. That's us reacting for decades. And as Senator Tester mentioned, people have passed away. What we're trying to do with S2950 is to get in front of this, to work with the VA to get in front of the burn pit exposure issue. Just want to be clear, is this one of the top DAV legislative priorities for this Congress?
It absolutely is. You know, like you said last night, and I want to say it again, we need to be proactive when it comes to taking care of veterans and not reactive. And exactly what I think this bill is doing is making us be proactive at helping these veterans before they actually need the service. We have things in place for them immediately.
So we will continue to work with you. Thanks for your great work. Your team's been fantastic on this. And importantly, work with the VA, because we want to make sure this is in conjunction with them. I notice, I mean, and you can only cover so many things. There's nothing in your testimony on another issue that a lot of us have been focused on, is exploring alternatives to treatments, to opioids, whether that's medical marijuana or other kind of alternative treatments. Do you have any views on that right now? I know there's only so much time you can put into your opening statement.
Yeah, we actually do, and I would actually my staff to maybe elaborate, because again, we're right, we didn't have much space in there for time, but I'd like my staff to maybe elaborate.
We've been very pleased that VA has taken up a number of alternative treatments to manage pain. And obviously for our population, service-disabled veterans with some catastrophic injuries and dealing with pain is a lifelong issue. And we want to make sure that veterans have a range of options to choose from. And VA's whole health model and their alternative, complementary and alternative options are very welcome, especially we hear so much from a younger generation. At the same time, we want to make sure, like medical marijuana, we do have a resolution that indicates we want the research to be done. VA should do it. We want to make sure, like any medication or drug, that research is done and that it would be an effective alternative for veterans dealing with pain.
So Senator Tester and I think you know, have legislation on that. We'd love to get your views, or if the DAV is supportive. So thanks again, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and look forward to continuing to working with all of you.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Now Senator Blumenthal.
Hi, I'm Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut. Anyone here from Connecticut today? Good for you. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to reassure everyone I'm not going to continue Senator Tester's line of questioning about your ages. And I'm not going to get into the dispute between Alaska and Texas. My mom said to me, if you don't have something nice to say about someone, don't say anything. Of course, my mom isn't here today.
And if your state's a little bit small, you might not want to get involved in that either.
Well, there you go. And we are fellow Marines, believe it or not. Hoorah. Let me just say, I want to say on a personal note, Commander Whitehead, I am so grateful to you personally for talking about your mental health treatment, because we need more people like you. Everybody in this room has demonstrated extraordinary courage and strength. You're veterans. But to talk about mental health takes an extra measure of courage. And I can tell you, I admire you for being a role model. I invited to the State of the Union this year as my guest an uncle of a young man, Tyler Reed, a Marine Corps sniper, who came back from 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, extraordinarily brave on the battlefield, but he came back with those same kinds of invisible wounds of war. And the VA failed him. We need to make sure that we give young men and women like Tyler Reed and yourself the health care they receive, the mental health care. Right now, the numbers of veterans seeking mental health care, fortunately, is rising. But we need to make sure they have the kind of encouragement and caregiving, thank you for mentioning that point, that leads them to seek that kind of health care, and the VA should do better providing it. I just want to say, because unfortunately I only have a little bit of time left, the VA provides great care to a lot of veterans, no question about it. In my state of Connecticut, the VA is much appreciated and admired. But as has been indicated here, the VA opposed the Agent Orange legislation, tooth and nail. They were going to appeal that court case that you mentioned. They were talked down from it. They have failed to implement electronic records. Literally 10 years ago when I came here, same issue. We'll, you know, the promise we'll deal with it next year. It's 10 years later. And of course, the Caregiver program, and now the new battlefield contaminants that threaten veterans' health, the K2 issue, PFAS, all of the chemicals and radiation on the modern battlefield can be as destructive to veterans' health as Agent Orange. So I want to thank all of you who are here today for keeping the VA, and particularly the VA leadership, mindful about its continuing obligation. Your work is so important, and I thank you for being here.
Senator Blumenthal, thank you. Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you all for being here. There's nothing better than looking out and just seeing a sea of you all. You know, I know it's hard to come up, and I know it's hard to, there's expense involved in all of those things, but there's just no substitute for you being here, having such a great presence, talking about how important these things are. So we really do appreciate you. If we got any Arkansas folks here? Very good. We appreciate you guys a bunch. We had a situation in Mountain Home, Arkansas, where the suicide rate was simply off the chart. DAV stepped in and literally identified every veteran in the area, went and visited them personally, and as a result, the suicide rate dropped down only you know, where it was, I think, a quarter of what it is nationally. So one of the things I'd like to ask you about is the fact that so many of the people that take their own lives aren't directly involved with the VA, maybe have no involvement at all. As a result of that, I guess what I would like to know is how we can do a better job of reaching those that aren't involved in the VA to get them in a situation where either the DAV or some other program can be of help.
Thank you for that question. I know one of the good things that the VA is doing now is the soldiers are transitioning out. They're now making phone calls for those that are, you know, within so many days of ETS and are retiring from the military service. They're getting a phone call to hopefully find them and get them, you know, in the system. But in organizations like the DAV, you know, continuing to do our outreach in the communities, you know, and being out in the community where these veterans are and sharing these resources with them, and every veteran needs to be familiar with that stuff is very important.
We recently passed out of committee the veteran suicide bill that is so very important. In it, there's a tool to monitor suicide prevention progress. And what it does is just basically say, are these programs working or are they not working? You know, we don't have any metrics right now. And so that's so very important so that we can beef up the programs that are working and get rid of the ones that aren't. Do you have any advice on, do you have any experience on some of the programs that are working that you feel like are doing a good job?
Yeah, I'd like to have my staff maybe elaborate on some of the information they have been pushed to them across the nation.
Yep. I think first I wanted to say that we're really heartened that both the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee and the House Veterans Affairs Committee, I mean, we've seen so much attention to this issue with regard to mental health, and I think everyone is frustrated that the rates have not come down, and we care for our comrades. And we know that VA is doing a great job with its integrated mental health system in primary care, its peer-to-peer program, the predictive analytics program that you talked about, and a number of other, wraparound services that are so essential to make sure that veterans have access to mental health when they're in crisis. But as you noted, when veterans are in the community and they're out there, I think that they're unaware of that they're eligible for VA care, or they're unaware of the benefits that may be there for them and the options. That's where you can use the VSO community. I mean, all of the like DAV, an organization like DAV, we have a wide range. All of our across the system, across the states, there are departments and chapters out there dealing with veterans on a daily basis, our NSO Corps. And we took, as an organization, this really seriously, and we asked VA to come in and do the SAVE training for both of our headquarters as well as our national service officers who meet with veterans daily. We want to be at the front lines and to make sure that if we see someone in trouble, we're going to get them to the experts and who can help.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for all you represent. And a big shout out to the auxiliary. We know who does all the work.
Senator Sinema.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I am thrilled that the Arizona DAV Commander Glenn Homan and our delegation are here today in the audience. Are you gentlemen around? That's right. Oh, hi. I want to give a special thanks to our guys for all the work that they do to support Arizona veterans community. You guys are incredibly important partners in our work to ensure that veterans get all the care that they've earned. My first question is for Commander Whitehead. Our staffs have spoken before about expanding the VA's medical foster home program to allow more veterans who can no longer live independently to choose to live in the private homes of VA-approved caregivers. This option could be a welcome alternative to entering into a traditional nursing home. I'm proud to work with Senator Blackburn to introduce a Senate companion to this important bill. Could you speak to the importance of the medical foster home and its impact in maintaining the dignity of our older disabled veterans? And do you believe it would benefit both the VA and veterans if more veterans could choose a medical foster home without having to pay for their care entirely out of pocket?
That's a great question, because obviously it's important that we take care of all of our veterans, and elderly veterans are very important to us because we want to be with them because of how long. But if my staff can maybe elaborate a little bit more on the foster piece.
We really appreciate your support for this unique program. It's so important. It's an alternative option rather than being in institutionalized care. To be in a foster home, to have a more home-like environment, is so critical for veterans when they may not have any other family members around. This can be a difference between them really embracing life and continuing to be productive, or really starting to go downhill. So we're so thrilled to hear that you're going to do that. We're 100% behind the medical foster home, any legislation. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Commander Whitehead, in your testimony, you touched on the difficulty that military families face during transitions into civilian life. You may know I introduced the Somers Veterans Network of Support bill to implement a program that ensures that loved ones receive information about VA programs and resources as a service member transitions out of the military. This is actually named after a veteran from my state, Daniel Somers, who tragically didn't get the care he needed from the VA, and we lost him to suicide. What information do you believe is most critical to share with loved ones so that they can best support their service member who's transitioning out of service? And how can VSOs best be engaged to ensure the success of the Daniel Somers network of support care?
That's a great question for the fact of, as I shared earlier, the transition from military service to civilian life is such a key piece to getting that service member, now veteran, back into the civilian life. Ensuring that the families at all of these events is critical. As the soldiers transitioning out, making sure that that family member, their loved one, is also part of that transition. So when our TSOs are actually at these military bases, as shared, the 100 military establishments that we're at, making sure that part of that invite is the family members. So when they're going through this information, that the family's hearing as well, because not everything goes home. When that soldier gets information, nope, not important, I'm going to keep going, but make sure it's there. But if my staff can maybe elaborate a little bit more on that.
I think the commander's answered that well. I think the having specific information about VA as well as other options, but just getting that information to in their hands. Oftentimes a veteran during that transition period doesn't really see for themselves, but their family certainly, or their loved one, or whoever they might choose to have that information shared with, so that they've got that protective factor around them. That's critical, and we are very happy to support that legislation.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The time has expired, but I want to extend my personal thanks to everyone who's here today, not only for your tremendous service and sacrifice to our country, but your continuing service by helping other veterans around our country. Thank you.
Senator Cassidy.
Thank you to both my chairs. Anybody from Louisiana here? They should be doubly thanked for being here because they are missing Mardi Gras. So happy Mardi Gras to you. thank you for your advocacy. Without your advocacy, a lot of good things will not happen. Now, I've been very interested in the transition assistance of which you refer. One thing I have learned, most suicides occur within 6 months of somebody separating from DOD. The average time for a first appointment in the VA after separating from DOD is 6 months or greater. Let that sink in. I happen to be a physician, and I spoke to a gastroenterologist in the Department of Defense. If somebody in the Department of Defense is diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease and needs to have monthly infusions, but the first appointment is 6 months after you separate, that's 6 months that you have to figure out how to get an infusion. So your advocacy is helping us address these issues. Commander, first, I've kind of listed this as potential problems. Have you seen the problems, number one? And number two, we're working on solutions, but I'd like to know what solutions you propose.
You know, that transition piece, that 6 month, to get that first appointment is very critical for us, and the VA is, the DAV is to make sure that the VA is getting after that timeline, right? So when that now veteran is trying to enroll into the VA to get into the system, we got to have more access for that in a timely manner. But if my staff could maybe elaborate a little bit more on that and all the different things going on.
On the benefits side, we had the privilege of the Undersecretary for Benefits addressing as we began our midwinter conference, and he pointed out the Solid Start program that they are engaged in, and that, giving a veteran, or now a veteran, a service member who just transitioned out, hope is a key piece, because it's an acknowledgement that they served, an acknowledgement of their sacrifice, an acknowledgement that they have care yet to come, and that prevents hopelessness when they get that separation and they contemplate suicide. So we really believe that Solid Start might be the beginnings of a great plan.
Let me ask you this. I've been told that every time somebody is deployed to a new station, there's an evaluation of his or her physical state and mental state, which tells me that when the person separates from DOD, if it's some young man who's 24 years old and robust health, maybe he doesn't need an appointment, probably won't show up. I was 24 once. But if somebody has a mental health issue and someone's saying they have an issue, then that should be an expedited referral and an expedited acceptance. And I could go down a list of medical conditions. I mentioned inflammatory bowel disease earlier. I'm a gastroenterologist, I would. Any thoughts on the DOD side about how we could have that other hand? We got to have both hands shaking, right? Any thoughts about that?
Well, I think in the big picture, when we're talking about self-reported information, the biggest risk is that they don't report it. So when they do, that's an absolute. There's got to be an immediate handshake and a warm handoff. And I'll let Joy add to that. Joy?
Yeah, I think when there's definitely a known issue before they're leaving military service, then that warm handoff is so critical to make sure they actually know where to go, who they're going to see, and they know they've got somebody, again, wraparound protective, services. And we just have to do everything we can to make sure that veterans know about those programs and they know that they can access care when they need it.
I'm the last one, so I'll take a little bit extra time just to say, one thing we also are working on is to get that total integration of the electronic health record. Because there would be a way on the electronic health record in DOD to flag up next appointment 3 weeks and to have a system whereby the doc would say, this is 3 weeks. By the way, this is not routine. 3 weeks. Did you hear me? 3 weeks. And that would go in with the entirety of the record. We've been assured that on a secretary level, this is being made a priority. But we're following up on that just to make sure. Because if that does happen, then it's less dependent upon an individual and it's now dependent upon a system. And sometimes systems work a little bit better.
One thing that VA told us that I found very interesting is that they know that that lowers the risk factors for suicide when they just do a phone call. When somebody doesn't show up for an appointment or in between, just following up to make sure, having either a peer-to-peer discussion or someone calling can make all the difference. So absolutely, we agree with that.
Thank you all very much. I yield.
Dr. Cassidy, thank you very much. Commander Whitehead, we've come to a conclusion. Works out really well. The Senate has a series of 5 votes starting at 3:30, so our timing was good. But I want to personally thank you for your presence here, your team, your wife Kim joining you, the efforts that you make. Clear to me that there's a lot of passion and care and concern and love for those who served our country and those who are in significant need of our help. And I appreciate that being exhibited today by you and the DAV. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be inspired by what you're doing and what you had to say. I thank you all for traveling here. It is impressive, as Senator Bozeman said, to see the DAV members from across the country present. It demonstrates to us the care that you have, the desire for improvements, and it has an impact. And we'll work hard to make sure that impact is felt as soon as possible for those that have served our country. And Commander, I thank your team here in Washington, D.C. that we see on an ongoing basis. And we recognize this is an annual occurrence, but you have a team that is present all the time, and we're grateful for their help and assistance. I always ask witnesses in any committee I chair if there's anything they would like to say, anything that they felt like they misspoke, or something else they want to make sure is said before I conclude the hearing. I know of nothing. I'm not necessarily suggesting that you did.
We just appreciate all of your enthusiasm, and congratulations to DAV on our 100th anniversary. And we appreciate all that you do. You often don't get that thanks as well. We know how hard you work and how much these issues mean to you, and we appreciate that.
Thank you. That's a very nice way to conclude. I would ask unanimous consent that members have 5 days, legislative days, to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material. With that, this hearing is now adjourned.